Welcome to the Monday Monologue, and today we're going to talk about value and what that means in the audiophile world. And I know a lot of people tie value to like cost, and they say that's a good value or that's a bargain. And just because something's a bargain doesn't mean it's a good value. And let me explain what I mean there, because I've been tripped up a few times, and I hope part of the value of my channel is that I can share with you some of the mistakes I make and some of the things I stumble across that really are a good value, and kind of help y'all decide what's a good way to get to a solid sounding system for yourself without spending a pile of money. Because you can spend a pile of money and still have a system that doesn't sound good. So anyway, let me give you some examples of things that on the surface looked like a good value, but at the end of the day, waste of money and time and all that, and energy. So I was looking for a device to measure resistors and capacitors very precision. Especially small value resistors are hard to measure with like a fluke meter. When you get into like 0.4 ohms and 0.2 ohms, it just doesn't have that kind of resolution. And the same thing's true when you get into really small capacitors. Some of these things we're using in like the EAR 834 clone, some other projects. It was just like, that's something missing from my toolkit. So I saw this little kit on the forums, and there's a YouTube video about it, and there were some people saying it was a pretty nice little deal, and I think it was $25. And then I decided to spend the extra and get the little case for it, which was another $15 or something like that. So I thought, it looks like a nice little thing. It's got this TFT screen, and it's supposed to be auto ranging, but you can select the ranges. It's got options, and it just looked like a neat little piece. Well, ordered this thing, was very careful assembling it, and I double checked that everything was assembled right, and it may just be the one I've got. It's junk. When you hook it up to an inductor, it's supposed to show you the resistance. The resistance isn't even close to what it's supposed to be. When you try to zero it or you short the leads out, it doesn't read 0 ohms. It reads some crazy numbers and stuff. And then when I was ordering it, the manufacturer was super responsive, and within 15 minutes I've got an email back about stuff I was asking about prior to the sale. Now that I'm contacting them about a problem, it's crickets. It's like, well, we sold you one. We don't care. There's no after the sale service. So, is this a good value? No. Because part of when you're buying retail should be that there's some customer support. And honestly, it's one of the reasons that I never went into production on any of my amplifiers. I was, considering that when I first started doing this, was building like the 6SQ7 amp. I was thinking about making that a finished product for sale, but then I started thinking about the customer service aspect of it, and I knew that I couldn't just leave people hanging, and I knew this was a product that tube amp, they can have glitches, or somebody can start sticking the wrong tubes in it and stuff, and then I feel like that I've got to warranty these things if the transformers go bad, even though I'm not making the transformers. And I just decided that, for the price point that I was going to be selling them at, trying to provide the customer service, I wasn't going to be able to do it, or wasn't willing to do it. And so we've just kind of stuck with a DIY YouTube channel. These folks are selling these things as a legit product, and I'm sure some of them work. This one doesn't. And like I said, I was super careful when I was assembling this thing. I've gone back and checked that all the resistors are in the right place and all that stuff. And it is. I don't know whether there's something wrong with the firmware, or the board's got a problem, or whatever. This one doesn't work. So then I went out and bought this little Peak somebody in the comments, and I really appreciate all the comments you guys make and your suggestions. And I try to at least like all of them so you know that I'm reading them. And I do read all the comments. And somebody was talking about this little meter, and it's a LCR 45 Peak Atlas, and this thing's awesome. Get them on Amazon. I think it was $150. So it was 3 times as much as this one, but that one doesn't work and there's no customer support. I bought this through Amazon. I know if it doesn't work, I can return it to Amazon. I'm sure the manufacturer supports these products, which I haven't needed, but it's so nice to be able to just use these little clip leads and check resistors as I'm building something, and it really is high precision. And you can check capacitors, and it shows you all the information you need to know. So this is a handy little tool to have in your toolbox. I'll put the link in the description below. But again, which was the better value? The one that was a third of the price but has no customer support, and at the end of the day it's probably going to end up getting thrown in the trash can, or the one that costs 3 times as much but actually works, and I can just use it as a tool? That's an example of value. And another example of value, or not a value, I've had a lot of people that were questioning me about this past ACA amp, and heard all the hype on the internet about it, and I know that it's got a lot of fans, and I thought, hey, I haven't done any real solid state stuff on the channel. That would be something cool to do. So I went and looked at their kits. Their kits were like $350 for not a lot of parts, and just the chassis was $150 or something like that. And that just seemed excessive to me. I mean, I know what doing one-off kind of fab work's like. It's not cheap. It's one of the reasons that I don't do fab work for you guys that you've wanted me to hey, can you fab me up a chassis for this thing? It's like, guys, it takes a long time. But I would assume that some kind of production fabricator, they could fabricate up those chassis and it wouldn't be that much money. So anyway, I decided, busy with a lot of projects already, why not just buy one of these from China that's already built? And it was about half the price. I think it was just under $200 shipped. It's like, I don't have to build it. It's all ready to go. I can just review it on the channel and, see what this thing's all about and listen to it. Admittedly, it's got China parts in it, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Been real hit or miss. I mean, here's another example of junk, so thought, let's give this thing a try. If nothing else, I can use the chassis for something else. So it came, didn't come with any documentation. I should have done more research on it. You'll see that in another video, but wasn't happy with the way it sounded. And I was like, why are people all hyped up about these things? I mean, they sound okay, but this amp sounds better. And this isn't one of my, this is a good sounding amp, but it's not like, top shelf stuff either. This is just some Compactron tubes, built with some budget Edcore iron, and I bet you could build one of these for $400, which is about the same price point as this, and it sounds much better to me. So I'm like, hey, what's the hype with this? And then a bunch of people in the comments were like, of course it sounds bad. You bought a China one. If you bought a real one, you'd see what we're talking about. So I pulled out the China boards, spent another $130 buying the real boards, and I could have just bought the boards, but then I knew that people would say, well, you didn't get their transistors, or you bought the wrong transistors, or so it's like, I'm just gonna buy the real stuff from the DIY audio store. So, I legit can say, yes, I am listening to what the Nelson Pass ACA amp is supposed to sound like. And took this apart, put the Nelson Pass boards in it, after again being super, super careful, taking my time, Didn't even do a video on it because I wanted to really focus on doing the work. Put it together, listen to it, and yes, it sounds better than it did with these boards, but not exponentially better. And it still doesn't sound as good as this little 6LU8 amp sounds. And like my EL34 SQ7 is a step beyond that. And then the 300B amp is a step beyond that. But people are talking like this is some kind of holy grail amp. And I know people are going to say, oh, well, you need to run them in bridge XLR mode with 2 of them and run them as monoblocks. And it's like, guys, you're talking about then 300B amp money. And at the end of the day, it's still a solid state amp. And I just can't believe that the sound signature is going to change drastically bridging this thing from what it sounds like as a stereo amp. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And I also don't think that this in any iteration is a good value, because you're talking about it's a kit. You've got to assemble the thing. I mean, if it was a pre-built amp, they'd have to sell it for $600 or $700. Then you got $1,400 in a pair of amps if you count your time in building these things. And then, is that a good value for what these are? And again, it's still just solid state stuff. There's nothing to get excited about, to me. And like after listening to this and giving it every chance of sounding as good as I could make it, and then, I tried it with 3 or 4 different preamps. And again, this is an integrated amp. You still got to have a preamp or something like that to drive it with. And then just to take the preamp out of the equation, I drove this and my other amp with my DAC. So it was just straight in. So there was nothing to say, oh, we used the wrong preamp. And this little amp killed it. It just had a grungy sound to it to me. And, maybe it fits certain genres of music and maybe people like the way that sounds, but I didn't like it. And so again, is this a good value? I don't think it is. I mean, if you built it maybe off of just the, $20 worth of parts from Mauser and got some eBay, heat sinks and, kind of cobbled up something together and had less than $100 in it, then yeah, that probably is a bargain. And, it would be okay to me for a, kind of a side hustle amp. But it's still not, to me, what I call like the 90th percentile. And I think that's one of the things that kind of defines my channel is I'm not looking for the absolute top shelf, 100th percentile, best in the world kind of audio gear. That's not what we're doing on this channel. And like you've seen, I don't use any like XLR input gears. I just use RCA interconnects on all my gear. And we're not using, $1,000 a piece output transformers. And we're not doing, $4,000 each speakers that we're listening to. Because I feel like at that point, you're going in the diminishing returns area of autophilia. And I try to keep things on what's a good value and how do we hit that 90th percentile sound quality without breaking the bank. A great example of that is the EAR 834 clone phono stage that I just keep, saying how great it sounds. I've got people that own, $5,000 and $6,000 phono stages that have built those and said, you know what? A/B testing, I don't really hear the difference. So I'm like, to get better than that, how much money do you have to spend? And is that a good value? And is that where you should be spending your money? I'll even go as far as to say that going beyond that 540 MXL Audio-Technica cartridge is diminishing returns. I spent $1,000 getting like the equal stylus moving coil cartridge and then a nice step-up transformer setup. Said $1,000, and I'm hard pressed to really hear $1,000 worth of improvement. The money would have been better spent on the turntable that I bought just to get something more reliable and with a better tone arm than what that old techniques I was using. So that's the kind of thing you need to sit down and look at. If I've got $1,000 to spend, where should I spend it? I should have spent it on the turntable, but I spent it on the cartridge and the step-up transformer, and then had to wait a few months to save up some money to then go buy the turntable, which actually did make a difference. So that's what I want to do with this channel, is kind of show you the value of the different things that I'm trying so that you don't make the mistakes that I made, and to try to get the most bang for your buck out of the audio gear that you buy. So I hope y'all are enjoying this content. Typical Monday monologue. Ran it a little bit, but not too bad this week, I don't think. And I didn't mean to bash on this, and if you think I'm trying to trash Nelson Pass, if you read what he said about this amp, it wasn't to build like this 90th percentile, knock it out of the park, solid state amp. This was built to be something simple, low part count, that shows the basics of how solid state amplification works, and something simple to build in a short period of time, that they would go home with a working amplifier that sounds decent. And even he doesn't understand the hype that's been created about this thing. And I just have to think that the people that are really loving on this thing are coming from like a really sterile sounding solid state gear, and that this has something that brings out some emotional response, kind of like these do to me. And I know that technically there's much better amplifiers than these tube amps that I'm building, but they just really sound good to me. They're engaging, and that's why we listen to music. So let's do some music recommendations for the week. One of them was submitted by a viewer, and I would have never thought this would be as good as it is. I'm not a huge George Benson fan, and I think it's probably from hearing a lot of his music in the 70s and the 80s that just was real kind of generic, kind of Love Boat sounding kind of music to me. But this is a really cool one. And of course it's got Earl Klugh in there who's joined him with us, but it's White Rabbit. This was recorded in 1971, and it's got a little, cover of the Jefferson Starship song, White Rabbit. Their little take on it in a jazz flavor. It's got kind of some Latin kind of influence in a lot of it, with the drums and the guitar and stuff, and it's just a really fun album to listen to. And like I said, I'm kind of shocked. There was another George Benson album I think I showed y'all that Earl joined him with, that I don't know if Earl kind of brings out a different side of George when they're playing together, but if you can find a copy of this is an early pressing, and I've heard that the first pressings are the good ones, so you might want to hunt these down. I don't think it's even been re-released, so that may be your only option. And then the other one, this is a classic one. It's got Sonny Clark and Dexter playing Go. This is available in release, I believe, still. Blue Note did this. The recording is just unbelievable, and this is just some classic good jazz. If you're not into jazz, pick this up and just give it a try. I listened to this last night, and I was listening to it on this, and then I switched over to my EL34 6SQ7 amp, and it just sounds magic on that setup with the RP600M speakers. So anyway, hope you're enjoying my channel. Hope you're enjoying this content. Hope you're enjoying kind of the focus that I'm trying to bring to my channel, and not this super high-end stuff, but a down-to-earth, like, here's a way to get where you want to be without spending a fortune, and have some fun doing some DIY projects in the process. So, if you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to you Patreon folks. I really appreciate your support, and also the folks that make donations on my website. That helps me afford to try projects like this. I'm probably going to put this thing up for sale. It did end up getting the Skunky seal of approval, but only for a solid state. It definitely is not my favorite amp to listen to, but maybe with your speakers and the kind of music you listen to, this thing will rock. So anyway, I'm going to probably list this on my Patreon site for you guys to take a swing at if you're interested in it. And I'll see you at the next Monday Monologue.